Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently draw you deeper into the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body become still, and allow the outside world to fade into silence. Tonight, a story waits for you in the dark. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and drift into Fear Noir. Story 1. I've never had trouble falling asleep. If anything, I fall asleep too easily. I'm the kind of person who can be mid-conversation on the couch and wake up 2 hours later with my neck bent at a bad angle. Long car rides put me out, planes, buses, even waiting rooms. My friends have always joked that it must be nice to have an off switch like that. It is nice. Or it was, because the problem isn't falling asleep. The problem is what happens after. No matter how long I sleep, I wake up exhausted. Not normal tired, not I stayed up too late scrolling, not I need coffee. I mean drained, heavy, like my body has been used for something while I was gone, like my head is full of wet sand, like I didn't sleep at all, even when I know I did. At first, I blamed stress, because that's what adults do. We point to work and say, that's why. We point to money and deadlines and broken routines and pretend it explains everything our bodies are trying to warn us about. Work has been chaotic lately. Too many meetings, too many late emails, the kind of schedule where you're always half behind. I told myself I was holding tension in my shoulders. I told myself I was grinding my teeth. I told myself my brain was running all night even when my eyes were closed. So I did the things you're supposed to do. I went to bed earlier. I stopped drinking caffeine after lunch. I bought one of those stupid sleep teas that taste like warm grass. I put my phone across the room so I wouldn't stare at it before bed. I tried a white noise app. I tried no white noise at all. I tried a new pillow. I tried sleeping on my side. I tried sleeping on my back with a pillow under my knees like the internet tells you to. Nothing changed. 8 hours, I'd wake up feeling wrecked. 9 hours, same thing. Even on weekends, when I slept in, I'd wake up and want to crawl right back under the blanket because my body felt like it had done something hard overnight. My muscles would ache the way they ache after you move apartments. My eyes would sting like I'd cried. Some mornings my jaw hurt, as if I'd been clenching it so tight my teeth were sore. And sometimes on top of that, I'd wake up with bruises. Not huge, dramatic bruises that look like you got hit with something heavy. Smaller ones, purple and yellow marks on my thighs, the inside of my arms, near my ribs, the kind that look like pressure bruises, like someone grabbed you hard enough to leave fingerprints, but not hard enough to break skin. At first, I tried to be reasonable. Maybe I was bumping into furniture during the day and not noticing. Maybe I was bruising easily from stress. Maybe I was tossing around in my sleep and hitting the bed frame. I even inspected my bedroom for sharp corners and edges, like I was a detective who didn't want to solve her own case. But the bruises kept appearing in places that didn't make sense. And it wasn't just bruises. Some mornings I woke up with a dull pain in my shoulder or my hip, like I'd slept wrong, but it felt deeper than that, like something had been pulled or twisted. Once I woke up with my wrist aching, as if I'd held it at an odd angle for a long time. Another morning the back of my neck was sore, and I found myself touching the spot over and over, half expecting to feel a bump or a bite. I live alone. There's nobody to blame it on. There's nobody to ask, did I do anything weird last night? The only witness to my sleep is the quiet. After about a month of this, I started dreading bedtime. Not because I couldn't fall asleep, but because sleep started feeling like something that happened to me, not something I chose. A friend suggested I try one of those sleep tracking apps. It records sounds while you sleep. She said, snoring, talking, even breathing patterns might help you figure out what's going on. If you're waking up so tired, maybe you're waking up a lot during the night and you don't remember it. It sounded harmless, clinical, the kind of solution that makes you feel like you're doing something responsible instead of spiraling. So I downloaded one. It had a clean interface, soft colors, little graphs and waveforms that made it feel scientific. It asked for permission to use my microphone. It asked if I wanted to connect it to my health data. I said yes to everything because if I was going to do this, I wanted the full picture. That first night, I set my phone on the nightstand and hit start. The app made a tiny sound like a soft click and then went quiet. I lay down, stared at the ceiling for maybe 3 minutes, and then fell asleep like I always do. The next morning I woke up tired, as usual, and the app showed me a timeline with little sound markers. I listened. It was breathing. A few shifts in the mattress, one moment where I apparently rolled over quickly. No voices, no strange sounds. Nothing to explain how awful I felt. The second night was the same, a normal night of nothing. I remember feeling disappointed, which should have been a relief. I should have been happy that the recordings were normal, but a part of me wanted proof that something was happening, because at least then I could name it. At least then I wouldn't be stuck with this vague feeling that something in my life had gone off track and I didn't know where. The third night changed everything. The next morning, the app showed a longer recording at 3:15 a.m. I noticed it because the waveform looked different, thicker, longer, like something had happened for more than a few seconds. My thumb hovered over it for a moment. I don't know why I hesitated. It wasn't fear yet, more like instinct, the way your body pauses at the edge of a stair when it's darker than it should be. Then I pressed play. At first, it sounded like the other clips, that soft static silence, the faint hum of my apartment, my breathing. For a few seconds I thought I'd misread the waveform, and it was nothing. Then I heard it. Wait. My voice. It sounded wrong, though. Slow, thick, like I was speaking from deep underwater, like the word had to travel a long distance to reach the microphone. There was a long pause after that. My breathing continued, steady but heavy, like I was asleep and very far away. Then, clearly, another phrase. Not yet. I sat up in bed with my phone in my hand and listened again. Wait. Not yet. It sounded like I was talking to someone. Not narrating a dream, not babbling nonsense. It sounded like a response. Like someone said something to me and I answered. I told myself it was sleep talking. People sleep talk. I've had an ex who used to tell me I said weird stuff at night. Back then, I thought he was exaggerating. Now, I wasn't so sure. But sleep talking didn't explain the bruises. It didn't explain the soreness. It didn't explain the exhaustion that felt like I'd spent the night working a second job in a place I couldn't remember. Still, I tried to keep it small in my mind. If I made it big, it would become big. If I treated it like a horror movie, I'd start seeing horror everywhere. So I went to work. I drank my coffee. I pretended I wasn't replaying my own slurred voice in my head during meetings. That night, I set the app again. I even laughed at myself a little while brushing my teeth. Like, okay, let's see what my sleepy brain comes up with tonight. I told myself I was being curious, not scared. In the morning, there was another recording. Same exact time. 3:15 a.m. I felt my stomach tighten because coincidence is one thing, but repetition is different. Repetition is pattern. Pattern is intention. Before I pressed play, I hesitated again. This time, it felt more like I was about to open a door I didn't want to open. I pressed play anyway. This recording started immediately. No warm-up silence. No. My voice again, but sharper than before, like I was suddenly awake enough to object. There was a pause, a long stretch of breathing that sounded almost strained, like I was trying to hold myself still. Then, "You shouldn't have done that." The words sounded like mine, but not completely. It was the right tone, the right shape, but the pitch dragged too low, and there was a strange layered quality to it, like more than one voice was inside the sound, not a clean chorus. More like overlapping echoes, like a person speaking in a room with too many mirrors. Then, very clearly, "Stop looking." The recording ended right there. Not naturally, not fading out. It simply stopped, like someone had hit the button. My first thought was, the app glitched. My second thought was, I didn't stop it. I opened the app settings and checked everything. It wasn't connected to a speaker. There was no auto stop option that would end a clip early. No smart setting that would cut off after a phrase. It should have recorded until the sound dropped back down. I checked my phone's system logs as far as I could, which isn't very far because phones don't exactly tell you everything they're doing. Nothing obvious, no update, no crash report. I walked around my apartment looking for another source of sound, like I was trying to prove to myself that this recording was contaminated, that maybe my phone picked up a neighbor's TV. Maybe someone walked in the hallway outside my door at the wrong moment. Maybe the app was mislabeling a timestamp and mixing clips. But my apartment was quiet. My building is old, but not thin-walled. I don't leave the TV on. I don't have a radio. I live alone, and I'm not the kind of person who falls asleep with podcasts blasting. That night, I did everything I could think of to control the environment. I closed all the windows. I double-locked my door. I checked that the chain was set. I even pulled down the blinds fully, even though I don't like sleeping in total darkness. I moved my phone closer to my pillow and started the app again. I told myself if something was happening, I wanted the microphone to catch it clearly. I wanted clean audio. I don't remember falling asleep. I remember thinking, I'll stay awake and listen, and then suddenly it was morning, and my eyes felt gritty, and my body felt heavy and wrong. There was a new recording. 3:15 a.m. The waveform was thinner this time, like there wasn't much sound at all. I pressed play. At first I thought it was empty, just faint static and my own breathing. Then I heard something underneath it, so low it was more vibration than sound, like whispering through a wall, like distant talking in another room. I turned the volume up. Still nothing clear. Just movement in the sound, a low shifting texture. I don't know why I did this. and even now I hate admitting it, but I brought the phone closer to my ear, like if I pressed it against my head, I could force the words into clarity, like it was a seashell, and I could hear the ocean if I listened hard enough. And for a moment, I thought I heard actual syllables, not clear enough to understand, but clear enough to recognize that it wasn't random noise. It had rhythm. It had pauses. It felt like language. So I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. That's when it happened. A sound split through the recording, sharp, loud, violent. A scream. It was so sudden and so loud that I dropped my phone like it burned me. It hit the bed, bounced, and landed on the floor, but the recording kept playing. After the scream, there was silence again. Not comforting silence, a thick, waiting silence, like the space after something breaks. Then, right before the clip cut out, I heard it clearly, close to the microphone, like someone leaned in. Too close. I didn't go back to sleep after that. I tried. I lay there with my eyes closed, but my body refused to relax. Every time I started drifting, my brain jolted me awake as if it had decided sleep was dangerous. At one point, I got up and walked through my apartment, turning on lights, checking rooms, opening closets, as if I expected to find someone crouched behind my shower curtain. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly where it should be. The air smelled like the same detergent and the same old wood and the same stale hallway smell that always creeps in under my door. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was daylight and my alarm going off and my body feeling worse than ever. Not just exhausted, but wrecked, like I hadn't slept for days. My muscles ached in that deep way you get after being sick. My phone was on my pillow. I didn't remember leaving it there. I remembered dropping it. I remembered it hitting the floor. It was on my pillow, near my face, like someone had placed it there carefully. The app had a new notification, one new recording. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to steady my phone with both palms. When I pressed play, I heard breathing. Immediately. Heavy breathing. Mine, but uneven. Shallow. Like I'd been running, or struggling. Like I'd woken up and panicked, and tried to catch my breath. Then there was movement. Fabric shifting close to the microphone, like someone sitting up in bed, like sheets being pulled aside. Then, footsteps. My stomach dropped. I stopped breathing without meaning to, as if my body thought staying silent would make me invisible, even though it was only audio. The footsteps continued, soft but clear, moving around my room. I could hear the floor creak in the exact way it creaks when I walk to the bathroom at night. I could hear the familiar squeak of one board near the foot of my bed. Then I heard another set of breathing. Not mine. It was close. Too close. Like it was right over the phone. Slow and controlled. Like whoever was breathing didn't need to hurry. And then my voice came through again. But not the way it usually sounds in sleep. This time it was clearer, closer to the microphone, and still wrong in that layered way, as if the words were being pressed through my voice instead of spoken by me. "She's listening," the voice said. "She can hear us now." The recording ended. I didn't listen again. I didn't want to hear it a second time and have it sink deeper. I didn't want my brain to memorize the exact tone, because once you memorize a sound like that, you start hearing it everywhere. inside the hum of your fridge, inside the wind outside your window, inside the silence. I looked at the timestamp. It wasn't 3:15 a.m. It was 8:05 a.m. I stared at it until my eyes hurt, then checked the time on my phone. 8:05 a.m. The recording had happened at the exact moment I was awake, in bed, staring at the screen. The app hadn't recorded an old clip. It hadn't mislabeled a file. It was showing a time that matched real time. And the worst part was that I couldn't remember any of it. I didn't remember heavy breathing. I didn't remember sitting up. I didn't remember walking around my room. I didn't remember anyone else breathing near my phone. I got out of bed and checked my bedroom door. Locked. I checked the windows. Closed and latched. I checked the closet, even though I knew how stupid that was, because what was I expecting? Someone crouched between my coats with a calm smile? Nothing. My apartment was normal. My body was not. That day I deleted the app. I deleted it in a rush, like removing it could remove what it had captured. Like if I didn't have a record, it couldn't be real. I went into my settings and removed microphone permissions. I removed it from my health data. I cleared the cache. I deleted everything. Then I sat on my couch in broad daylight, with all the curtains open, and tried to breathe normally. I told myself I'd made a mistake, that sleep tracking apps are creepy by nature, that they make you hyper-aware of sounds you'd otherwise ignore, that my brain was spiraling because I was already anxious about sleep, that the mind can do strange things when it's tired enough. But deleting the app didn't fix the real problem. Every morning, I still woke up exhausted. Some mornings, I woke up with new bruises, darker ones now. More concentrated, like a hand had pressed hard against my arm, like fingers had dug in. Once I found a bruise near my collarbone that looked like a thumbprint, and it made me feel sick. And the exhaustion got worse too. It wasn't just sleepiness, it was that hollowed-out feeling, like something had been pulled out of me overnight and left me running on fumes. I stopped drinking coffee because it wasn't helping. I started taking naps because I felt like I might collapse at work, and the naps didn't help either. I would fall asleep instantly and wake up feeling exactly the same, or worse. I started being afraid of the moment my eyes closed, but I also started being afraid of staying awake, because the 8:05 a.m. recording broke the one rule I'd been clinging to. I'd been telling myself that whatever this was, it needed me asleep. It needed me unaware. But if it didn't need that anymore, if it could move and speak and breathe near my phone while I was awake, then I didn't know what staying awake would even protect me from. I checked my apartment for normal explanations, like I was trying to rescue my sanity. Carbon monoxide detector? Working. I bought a new one anyway. Locks? Fine. I added a cheap door alarm that makes a loud sound if the door opens. It never went off. I looked for signs of someone entering. Scuffed marks near the window. Anything moved. Nothing obvious. I started sleeping with a light on. Then, I started sleeping with 2 lights on. Then, I started sleeping with the TV on low, just so there would be constant sound, because silence started feeling like an invitation. It didn't matter. I still woke up like someone had shaken me all night, without letting me remember it. This morning, I woke up, and my first thought was that I had to go to work and pretend to be normal. My second thought, right behind it, was the one that made my blood feel cold. My phone. I reached for it, and saw an icon on my screen that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. The sleep tracking app, back, installed. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. I know I deleted it. I know I did. I remember the exact feeling of relief when the app vanished from my home screen. I remember going into the App Store afterward to make sure it wasn't still sitting there half installed. I remember. But there it was again, like it had never left. There was a notification on it. One new recording. I haven't pressed play. I'm sitting here writing this instead because I don't know what I'll do if I hear my voice again. I don't know what I'll do if I hear that layered imitation voice close to the mic. I don't know what I'll do if I hear footsteps in my room while I'm supposedly asleep. And the app is recording right now. I didn't start it. I didn't open it and hit a button. I haven't even touched the screen in the app. The timer is running anyway, like it's listening for something, like something is already talking. I keep staring at my phone, expecting the screen to go dark, expecting the recording to stop, expecting it to behave like an app and not like a thing with its own plans. I don't want to sleep tonight. I don't think I can, but I also don't know if staying awake will help. Because if it doesn't need me asleep anymore, then I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do when the thing I used as a tool to understand my nights has turned into another witness, another mouth, another way for whatever is happening to remind me that it knows I'm listening. And I can't stop thinking about that sentence on the recording, the one that makes my skin crawl every time it crosses my mind. She's listening. She can hear us now. Story 2. It happened when we were 8. I'm older now, and I still don't know what I believe about it. I only know what I saw, what I didn't say, and what showed up in the ground afterward. It started the way most childhood trouble starts, with 2 kids whispering like they had the best secret in the world. Craig and his sister Miranda cornered me at recess near the far end of the playground, where the teachers didn't pay close attention unless someone was bleeding. Craig was the kind of boy who always had scraped knees and a smug grin, like he'd been dared to do something stupid and was proud he'd done it. Miranda was louder, bossier, and somehow always got her way. She liked being the one who knew things first. "We found something in the woods," Craig said, eyes bright. Miranda leaned in like she was sharing gossip. "We call it the hands," she said. "It's so freaky." "You're going to freak when you see it," Craig added. "It's so awesome." The woods behind the school weren't deep or magical the way woods feel in storybooks. They were just a strip of trees the school district hadn't bothered clearing, a patch of green that turned into mud in the spring and smelled like wet leaves in the fall. Kids went back there sometimes to smoke older siblings' cigarettes or to hide during tag. Teachers warned us not to go, which made it sound more exciting than it probably was. I should have said no. I was the cautious one in our little group, the kid who didn't like breaking rules unless someone else broke them first. But I also hated being the boring one. I hated feeling like I was always watching life happen instead of being part of it. So when Craig and Miranda told me to follow them, I did. We waited until the recess monitor turned away, then slipped off the edge of the playground and into the trees. The air changed right away. It got cooler, heavier, and smelled like dirt and sap and something sour underneath, like old mushrooms. Craig took the lead. He walked like he'd been back there 100 times. Miranda kept glancing over her shoulder, not nervous exactly, but excited to see my reaction. I remember thinking she looked like a tour guide, We followed the dirt path for about 5 minutes until we came to a big tree stump that I recognized. It was the kind of landmark kids use, because it's obvious even when you're not paying attention. Wide and pale where it had been cut, with rings you could count if you cared. Craig stopped there and pointed. "Left," he said. We stepped off the path into thicker brush. Branches scratched my arms. Briars caught at my shoelaces. The woods felt more serious here, less like a place kids wandered, and more like a place they weren't supposed to enter. I kept expecting a teacher to appear behind us, or a dog to start barking, or for Craig to suddenly say he was kidding. Instead, he kept walking, and I noticed the arrows. They were carved into tree trunks, rough and old, not fresh like something a kid did with a pocket knife last weekend. Some were faded, half swallowed by bark growth. Some had dark stains inside the cuts, as if they'd been there long enough to collect dirt and rain. They weren't on every tree, just enough to guide you if you knew to look. "That's how we found it," Miranda said, catching me staring. "We just followed the arrows." I asked who carved them, but Craig shrugged like it didn't matter. At 8, it didn't matter. You don't think about the kind of person who makes a trail into the woods and marks it with arrows. You just think, cool, a secret path. After another 5 minutes of pushing through brush, we reached a fence. It was tall and made of wood pickets, forming a square enclosure maybe 50 feet on each side. The fence leaned in places like it was tired. Some pickets were missing, others were split and warped. Old white paint clung to it in patches, and there were faded letters across one section, like someone once painted a warning. I stood there squinting while Craig traced the shapes with his finger. "It says danger," he whispered, proud of himself for reading it. The rest was broken up by missing boards, but you could guess what it had been. Danger, keep out. Miranda found the gap where a picket had fallen away. "Come on," she said, and slipped through like she belonged there. Craig followed. I hesitated just long enough to feel my stomach twist, then stepped through after them. Inside the fence was a clearing, and the moment I saw what was there, my brain tried to refuse it. It felt like my eyes didn't know what to do with the image. Hands were sticking out of the ground, not one or two, dozens. They reached up through the forest floor like plants, like mushrooms, like something had sprouted arms instead of stems. They were scattered across the clearing, not in neat rows, but not fully random either. They were spaced mostly 6 inches to a foot apart, close enough that you had to watch your footing. They were all different heights. Some were just fingertips barely breaking through the dirt, like something buried underneath was trying to test the air. Some were full hands, wrists included, palm open or half curled. One stood almost a foot high, an entire forearm exposed, the skin stretched over bone like it had been there too long. And they looked real, not plastic, not toys, real skin, real fingernails, real veins. Some were pale and wrinkled like old people's hands. Some were smooth and tan like someone young. Some had dark hair on the knuckles. One had a shiny bracelet around the wrist. Another had long nails painted hot pink. My mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Craig loved my silence. "Told you," he said. "Watch this," he added, and picked up a stick. Before I could tell him to stop, he poked a big hairy hand right in the center of the palm. The hand snapped shut so fast it made my whole body jump. It grabbed the stick and held it tight. I blurted out, too loud, Holy shit. Craig laughed because he liked the fact that I swore. Do they all do that? I asked, trying to keep my voice down now that I'd realized how loud it sounded in the quiet woods. Yeah, Craig said, grinning. But some are faster, Miranda added, pointing to a thicker wrist with a strong-looking hand. That one can even catch stuff if you throw it. Craig lowered his voice like he was explaining the most important rule in the world. You can only touch them with a stick or something. You can't touch them directly. What happens if you touch one? I asked, already knowing I didn't want the answer. Miranda rolled her eyes. It gets you? Duh. That should have been the moment we ran back to the playground and never returned. But kids are stupid, and kids are also curious in a way adults forget. At 8, the world still feels like it has secret doors built into it, and sometimes those doors open. We stayed in the clearing for a long time. We poked different hands. Some snapped quickly, some were slower, like they had stiff joints. A few didn't move at all, just stood there with fingers half curled like they were asleep. The hands didn't feel warm from where we stood. They looked cold, damp, like they belonged underground. The air in that clearing smelled different than the woods outside the fence. It smelled more metallic, like pennies. I didn't tell Craig or Miranda that because I didn't want to sound scared. After that day, we went back again and again. The hands became our secret place, the thing we talked about in whispers when other kids were around, the thing that made us feel special, like we knew something the world didn't. We never told anyone because we knew adults would ruin it. Adults would call police. Adults would put up new fences. Adults would explain it away or lock it up. So we kept it to ourselves. One time, weeks later, Craig crouched near one particular hand and waved me over. Whoa, he said. This one has a birthmark just like yours. I felt my face get hot. I'd always been self-conscious about my birthmark. It was a noticeable purple patch on the back of my hand, roughly shaped like New Jersey, and kids had pointed it out enough times that I hated showing my hands in pictures. I used to hide it under long sleeves even when it was warm. Craig pointed at a pale, wrinkled hand sticking out of the ground. It looked like an old man's hand, thin skin, pronounced veins, knuckles like knots. And on the back of it was a blotch of purple, the same shape, the same placement. I leaned closer, even though every instinct told me not to. The similarity was striking in a way that made my stomach tighten. Maybe it's your twin, Craig said, like he was being funny. How could it be my twin? I snapped. It's like 100. I don't know. He shrugged, but his grin wasn't as confident as usual. Miranda stared at the hand a little too long, then stepped away. That's gross, she muttered. After that, I kept noticing details in the hands that stuck in my mind. A scar on one knuckle that looked like it healed wrong. A wedding ring indentation on a finger. Pale skin where the ring must have sat. Dirt under fingernails that never seemed to wash away. Some hands were so clean they looked freshly scrubbed, which didn't make sense in soil that damp. We started counting them one afternoon because kids will turn anything into a game if you give them enough time. We counted twice to make sure we didn't mess up, and we got the same number both times. 37. We joked about it like it was our special number. 37 hands. 37 secrets. Then came the squirrel. It happened on a day that felt normal at first. We were watching the hands the way we always did, shifting around the clearing, careful where we stepped. Animals usually avoided that fenced-in spot. Birds didn't land there. Squirrels stayed in the trees above. Even bugs seemed less active in the center of the clearing. But that day, a squirrel came down the trunk of a nearby tree and hesitated at the edge of the fence, like it was deciding if it wanted to be brave or stupid. We stayed still, watching it. One of the hands was holding something between its thumb and forefinger. A black walnut. It looked deliberate, like bait. The squirrel crept closer. It stood up on its back legs, nose twitching. Then, with the quick boldness animals have when they want food, it climbed into the hand to snatch the walnut. The squirrel was fast. The hand was faster. It snapped shut around the squirrel and squeezed. I saw the knuckles go white with pressure. The squirrel thrashed, twisting, claws scraping at the hand, making tiny panicked sounds that pierced the quiet. None of us spoke. We just stared, horrified and fascinated at the same time, because that's what kids do when they see something they aren't supposed to see. They freeze and take it in. The squirrel fought for about a minute. It slowed down, jerking less and less. Then it made a few last spasms, twitched, and went limp. The hand didn't loosen. It held on, as if it was waiting, as if it was enjoying the feeling of something alive turning into something not alive. When we came back the next day, the squirrel was gone. No fur, no bones, no blood, nothing to show it had ever been there. After that, I started having trouble enjoying the hands the way I had before. I still went because Craig and Miranda wanted to go and because the secret had become part of our friendship. But I didn't feel the same thrill. I felt wary, like the clearing was teaching us something, and I didn't like the lesson. The last time we went together was right after spring break. We met up after recess the way we always did. Craig and Miranda, buzzing with stories from their trip. Their grandma lived near the beach, and they'd come back with souvenirs like kids do, holding little pieces of vacation like trophies. Craig showed off a shark-tooth necklace and a mood ring he'd bought at an aquarium gift shop. He explained, with total confidence, what the colors meant. He said black meant scared, blue meant calm, green meant happy. He claimed his dad told him mood rings were invented by NASA scientists, which sounded impressive enough that I almost believed it. Miranda showed off henna tattoos on her cheek and the back of her hand. They were small hearts, reddish-brown, still fresh-looking. Emily did it for me, she bragged, talking about their older cousin. She's a real tattoo artist and stuff. Looks like butts, Miranda snapped, stomping her foot. Miranda has butt tattoos, Craig sang, holding out his hand like he was performing for an audience. Whatever, Miranda said, flipping her hair like she was too cool to care, even though her face was red. Their argument faded as we approached the fence, the way arguments do when something more interesting pulls focus. Inside the clearing, Miranda looked across the hands with a strange kind of excitement. "Okay," she said. "I have a new game." Craig rolled his eyes but leaned closer anyway. I felt that small pinch of dread again. "You have to be super brave," Miranda said, and before we could ask what she meant, she stepped into the field. She started hopscotching between the hands. Not randomly, carefully, but fast. Jump after jump, threading the space between reaching fingers like she was dancing on a minefield. She didn't look down much, which made it even scarier. She reached the other side of the clearing, about 40 feet away, and turned around with her arms up like she'd just scored a point. "Come on," she called. "It's easy." Craig and I stayed where we were. The hands looked different when you imagined falling into them, when you imagined a palm snapping shut around your ankle. Craig swallowed hard. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he said. Miranda laughed. "Because you're scared," she teased. "I can tell because your ring's black. That means scared. I can see it from here." Craig held up his hand immediately. "Nuh-uh, it's not black. It's blue," he said, voice too loud. "See?" He took a deep breath, puffed his chest out, and stepped into the hands. He wasn't as graceful as Miranda. He stumbled once, arms windmilling, and my heart nearly stopped. But he caught himself and kept going. Hop, 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 until he made it across and stood next to his sister, both of them grinning like they'd won something. Then Craig pointed at me. "Now you have to try." "I don't want to," I said, and hated how small my voice sounded. What if I touch one by accident? Miranda immediately made a face. "Chicken." Then she and Craig started flapping their arms like wings and making loud squawking noises. They were laughing so hard they were bent over, and the sound echoed weirdly against the fence. "You're being dumb," I snapped, cheeks burning. I could feel my eyes sting with embarrassed tears, which made me even angrier. I took one step into the clearing, placing my foot carefully between two hands that were half raised like they were waiting. Then I took another hop. Then another. On the third hop, my shoe slid slightly on a patch of loose dirt. For a split second, I knew I was going down. I pictured my knee hitting the ground, my hand reaching instinctively to catch myself, fingers landing in a palm that would snap shut like a trap. Fear hit me so hard it felt like ice. I regained my balance, barely, and without thinking, I hopped backward, then stepped out of the field, back to safety. Miranda groaned. "Lame." Craig laughed. "You barely got in at all." My heart was pounding so hard my throat hurt. My eyes filled, and I hated them for it. I hated Craig and Miranda for teasing me. I hated myself for caring. "This is a dumb game," I yelled. "I don't want to play anymore." And then I stormed off, stomping through brush like I wanted the whole woods to hear me. Craig and Miranda called after me, but I didn't listen. I was too busy being 8 years old and furious and humiliated. I've replayed that moment so many times over the years. I've wondered what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd calmed down. If I'd walked back with them instead of leaving them in that clearing with those hands. That night, someone rang our doorbell. It was Craig and Miranda's parents. I remember Craig's mom's face, pale and tight, and the way her hair looked like she'd run her hands through it too many times. Craig's dad stood beside her, jaw clenched, trying to look controlled and failing. They asked my parents if I'd seen the kids after school. They didn't come home, their mom said, and her voice sounded like she didn't believe her own words yet, like she thought if she said it out loud, it would become real. My parents looked at me. My dad asked where I'd last seen Craig and Miranda. My stomach dropped through the floor. Craig, Miranda, and I had an unspoken rule. The hands were a secret. We never talked about them at home, never hinted. We knew adults would shut it down. We knew we'd get in trouble. But now 2 kids were missing, and their parents were standing in my doorway, terrified. I lied for half a second. I almost did. I almost said we'd just been at recess. I almost said they went home early. Then I remembered the squirrel and the walnut and the white knuckles and the way the squirrel went still. I told them not everything, because I could barely speak through the panic, but enough. I said there was something in the woods, something we'd been visiting. I said it was behind the school. I said I could show them. We went out into the night with flashlights. My parents, Craig and Miranda's parents, and me leading the way with my stomach twisting harder with every step. The woods looked different at night. The path was a narrow strip of pale dirt in the flashlight beams. Trees rose up like walls. Every sound felt louder. Every rustle made someone jerk their light toward it. When we found the stump, I felt a wave of sick familiarity. When we stepped off the path and followed the arrows, my mouth went dry. When we reached the fence, Craig's mom whispered, "Oh my God," like she could already feel what was coming. We slipped through the broken picket gap. Flashlights swept across the clearing. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The adults didn't understand what they were seeing. Hands reaching up through dirt. Fingers frozen mid-curl. Palms open like begging. Then Craig's mom screamed. Right after that, Craig's dad screamed too, a raw sound that didn't even sound like a word. Their flashlight beams were fixed on two hands near each other, closer to the fence than the rest, as if they'd pushed up recently. These hands hadn't been there before. I knew that immediately. They were taller than most, with almost the full arms protruding from the ground, elbows still buried but forearms raised like someone trying to climb out. When I stepped closer, my heart sank so hard I felt dizzy. They were small hands, child hands. On one wrist was Craig's mood ring, the one he'd been showing off all week, the band catching the flashlight beam with a dull shine. On the other was Miranda's henna tattoo, the heart-shaped mark still visible on the back of the hand like a signature. No, one had to say their names. The hands said it for them. I remember my mom grabbing my shoulders and pulling me back like she thought the hands could leap out and take me too. I remember Craig's mom dropping to her knees in the dirt, crying so hard she couldn't breathe properly. I remember Craig's dad turning in a circle with his flashlight, shouting their names into the woods like the woods would give them back if he was loud enough. The hands didn't move, not then, not that I saw. They just stood there reaching, as if that was all they ever did. I don't remember exactly how we got home after that. I remember police lights later. I remember adults talking in low voices, like they didn't want me to hear. I remember being put in bed and lying awake with my eyes wide open, seeing the mood ring, and the henna again and again every time I blinked. They searched the woods for days. They brought in dogs. They taped off the area. People whispered about kidnappers and runaways and accidents. Some people said Craig and Miranda fell into a sinkhole. Some people said they ran away to the beach. Some people said the parents were lying about when they last saw them. The official story never made sense, because the official story couldn't include what we'd found. The fence was gone soon after. The police made sure nobody could get back there. The arrows on the trees got cut out or painted over. The clearing was treated like it didn't exist. But for years, when I rode the school bus past the edge of the woods, I would look at the tree line and feel that cold, tight fear in my stomach. I would think about those hands and wonder how many of them used to be people, how many of them had names, how many of them had families that eventually stopped waiting for them. And I would think about the hand with my birthmark, pale and wrinkled, and feel my throat close up. Because the part that never leaves me isn't only that Craig and Miranda disappeared. It's the possibility that the hands don't just take you. They keep you. They turn you into something that reaches forever out of the place you fell into, waiting for someone to come close enough to touch. Story 3. They're dead, a muffled voice said from the other side of the kitchen door. Do you need to come check? No, I called back. Too fast. That's okay. I pressed my back against the wall in the hallway, one hand braced on my belly, the other gripping the edge of the door frame, like I might slide down if I let go. My heart was racing so hard it made the baby shift, a slow roll that pushed against my ribs and reminded me how little room was left inside me. I didn't want to go into the kitchen. I didn't want to look at what was left of that thing again. I didn't want to see the pale, gauzy ball tucked under the serving tray, or the tiny legs wriggling out of it like smoke turning into insects. I needed sleep, or a distraction. Anything that wasn't spiders. I shivered just thinking about it, seeing it in my mind the way you see something after you close your eyes. The egg sac had been a white lump of silk, like a cotton ball that had gotten wet and tightened into a different shape. It hadn't been big, maybe the size of a walnut, but it looked wrong in a way that made it feel huge. And there were already babies, little black dots with 8 legs, crawling out as if they'd been waiting for one small change in light. I knew, logically, it was my fault. I'd left the serving tray out too long after the party last week. Not the food. Thank God, I wasn't that careless. I'd cleaned the trays, scraped and rinsed everything, put dishes in the dishwasher, wiped the counters the best I could. But I'd been so tired at the end of the night that I'd left a few bigger items on the kitchen island, thinking I'd put them away in the morning. Morning had turned into days. Pregnancy brain, people call it like it's cute, like it's a funny little quirk. But for me, it felt like living inside a fog. I could start a task and forget I started it halfway through. I'd open a cabinet and stare at it, trying to remember what I came for. I'd lose my phone while it was still in my hand. I'd put the remote in the fridge and the milk in the pantry and only realize later when something felt wrong. And that's how a clean serving tray sat out long enough for something to decide it was a safe place to make a home. I hated spiders. I wasn't proud of it. I'd tried to laugh about it for years, like it was a silly phobia, a harmless fear. But it wasn't harmless when your throat closed and your skin crawled and your brain started throwing images at you like punishment. I could deal with roaches. They were disgusting, but they were simple. You saw one, you sprayed it, you cleaned, you moved on. Spiders were different. Spiders hid. Spiders waited. Spiders could live inches from your face without you knowing until you turned on a light. And spider eggs were worse than spiders, because one spider is one problem. An egg sac is 30 problems, 50, 100, a whole future of problems. I had seen the egg sac under the tray and felt something cold sweep through my body, as if someone had opened a freezer door in my chest. I'd backed away on instinct, hands up, almost tripping over the bar stool. Then I'd slammed the kitchen door and stood outside it like the door was the only thing protecting me from a flood. I'd called Tim at work with shaking hands. I'd barely been able to speak. He'd promised he'd take care of it when he got home. Now he was home. He had said the spiders were dead. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt stuck in place, listening to the silence behind the door. "You got the mother, right?" I called, trying to make it sound casual. Like it was a joke, like I wasn't seriously asking if he'd killed the spider that had laid the eggs. There was a pause that felt too long, then his voice again, calm and flat. "Yes, dear. Of course." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Good," I said, and even to my own ears my voice sounded thin. I don't think I could have slept here tonight imagining the size of the spider that could have laid that thing. "You know," Tim replied, from inside the kitchen, "you've really got to do something about this phobia of yours." The words weren't unusual. He'd said stuff like that before, usually teasing, usually in a gentle way. Tim liked to joke when he could tell I was spiraling. It was one of the things I loved about him. He could turn fear into something smaller, something manageable. But this time, his voice didn't sound playful. It sounded irritated. The tone was wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like there was a tightness in it. Like he was annoyed with me for asking. Like he'd come home exhausted and didn't want to deal with my panic. Like he resented me for needing him. My stomach tightened. Pregnancy had made me sensitive. I knew that. Sometimes I read meaning into things that weren't there. Sometimes I took a normal sigh as proof someone was angry. Sometimes I cried because we were out of the cereal I wanted. So I tried to smooth it over the way I always did. I tried to shift the mood. "Come back out here so I can welcome you home properly," I said, putting sweetness in my voice, putting a little flirt into it. "You don't even get a hello, not immediate silence, like the kind where someone is walking away from you. Just nothing. No footsteps, no cabinet door, no running water, no trash bag rustling, nothing that said he was still moving in there." "Tim," I called, and my voice rose even though I didn't want it to. Still nothing. Something in my gut turned over, heavy and uncomfortable. Was he messing with me? He liked practical jokes, the harmless kind, jumping out from behind a doorway, hiding my phone for a minute, putting a rubber spider in my shoe and then laughing while I swore at him. He thought it was funny because he didn't understand that for me, spiders weren't funny. Maybe he wanted me to come into the kitchen so he could scare me. Maybe he was standing in the dark waiting to throw the empty egg sack at my face like a gross trophy. Maybe he'd gone out the back door to toss it in the outside trash. I waited, listening for any sound that would make things make sense. The back door opening, a plastic bag crinkling, his keys clinking on the counter. Anything. Nothing. The house felt too quiet, like it was listening to. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, more to myself than to him. I stomped into the living room on purpose, letting my feet hit the floor harder than usual so he'd hear me and know I wasn't playing along. If he wanted to be childish, fine. I'd be stubborn. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels until I found Jeopardy. The bright set and the familiar voices felt comforting. The living room light spilled across the hallway, but the kitchen door stayed closed, a solid rectangle of wood that suddenly felt like a boundary. I sat where I could see the kitchen door clearly. If Tim tried something stupid, I would see him. If he swung the door open with a grin, I'd be ready. If he tried to creep out and scare me, I'd ruin it by looking right at him. I watched the show, I answered a few questions out loud without thinking, then realized my voice sounded strange in the quiet house, like it didn't belong. Half an episode passed. Tim still hadn't come out. The irritation I'd felt at his silence started melting into something else. Concern, then fear. Because jokes have a rhythm. Even when someone commits to a prank, there's movement, there's muffled laughter, there's the sound of someone trying not to be heard. This wasn't that. I muted the TV. The sudden quiet hit me like a pressure change. The air in the living room felt colder. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall. And I could not hear Tim. I stood up carefully, shifting my weight the way pregnant women do when their center of gravity is changed. I walked back toward the kitchen, slower now. My hand found the back of the couch for balance, even though I didn't need it. It was more habit than necessity. It felt good to have something solid. I reached the kitchen door and put my hand on the knob. I hesitated. "Tim?" I called softly through the wood. "Are you okay?" No answer. I pushed the door open a crack. The kitchen was dark. That didn't make sense. The kitchen light had been on earlier. I'd left it on when I shut the door. Tim would have turned it on if he'd come in to deal with the spiders. I opened the door wider, just enough to see the outline of the island and the faint glow of the microwave clock. The room was still. The darkness made it feel bigger than it should have been. I felt along the wall until I found the light switch and flipped it. The overhead light snapped on, harsh and bright. Tim was standing at the island with his back to me. He didn't turn. He didn't react to the sudden light. He didn't even shift his weight. For a second, relief washed through me so hard my knees felt weak. He was there. He hadn't vanished. He hadn't fallen. He hadn't left. Then the relief turned into confusion. Because he wasn't doing anything. He was just standing, perfectly still, facing the counter like he'd been frozen halfway through a task. His shoulders were squared, his arms hanging at his sides, hands relaxed. He looked like someone posing for a mannequin. "Tim?" I said again, stepping in. The egg sack was still on the island in front of him. I could see it now, the pale bundle of silk. The edges of the serving tray were visible around his torso, like the tray was still partly covering it, and my stomach clenched, because if the egg sack was still there, then what did he mean by, "they're dead"? The kitchen smelled faintly sweet, like old fruit, even though I knew there was no fruit out. It was the wrong smell for the room. The air felt thick. I let the door swing shut behind me without meaning to. The click of it closing sounded too loud. "Honey?" I walked toward him carefully, like he might be a sleepwalker and I didn't want to startle him. This isn't funny. He didn't move. Not even a small twitch of his shoulders. I stopped a few feet away, my skin prickling. That's when I noticed something that made my mouth go dry. He didn't look like he was breathing. I watched his back, waiting for it to rise and fall, waiting for the subtle movement of lungs filling. Nothing. The silence in the kitchen felt different than silence should. Not empty. Held. My eyes drifted downward, scanning him like my brain was searching for an explanation it could accept. Maybe he was playing the most committed joke of his life. Maybe he was holding his breath to scare me. Maybe he'd fallen asleep standing up like a horse, which would have been ridiculous, but at least it would be human. Then I saw it. Thin silver thread. It was so fine that at first my eyes didn't register it. It looked like light itself, like a faint reflection. But then I saw more of it, and more stretched between his arms and the ceiling, between his legs and some unseen point behind him. Strands ran from his shoulders, his wrists, his head. He wasn't standing on his own. He was suspended, like a marionette. I felt my body start to back away before my mind fully caught up. My feet moved without permission, my hand lifted instinctively toward my belly, as if I could shield the baby from whatever was happening. I took one step back. The threads shimmered slightly. Tim remained motionless. Then he spoke. "You got the mother, right?" he said. My blood turned cold because the voice was wrong. The words were the ones I'd said earlier, but the tone was mocking, stretched into a shape that didn't belong to him. It sounded like Tim's voice the way a cheap recording sounds like someone, close enough to fool you for a second, but warped, as if someone was using it without understanding how it should feel. And the sound wasn't coming from his mouth. It was coming from somewhere else, from above. I couldn't stop myself from looking up. At the top of my vision, in the corner where the ceiling met the wall, a shadow moved. A shape larger than anything in the room had a right to be. A slow, creeping motion that didn't match any normal animal. Legs unfolded from the darkness in long, careful angles, like joints that didn't belong to something built for this world. I couldn't see it fully, not yet. The ceiling light was bright, but the corner held darkness like it was thicker there, like the light couldn't fill it. But I could see enough to know what it was. 8 legs, a massive body pressed close to the ceiling. It moved with patience, like it didn't need to rush, like it already owned the room, the house, the space between my thoughts. My throat tightened. My lungs refused to fill properly. For a second, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, loud and stupid, and the faint creak of one thread tightening as the thing shifted its weight. Tim's body, Tim's shape, tilted a fraction, controlled by the threads. His head turned slightly, still not on his own, like a puppet's head turning when someone above decides to look. The egg sac sat between us like a centerpiece, and I understood something then, not as a clean thought, but as a sudden sick certainty. The eggs hadn't been left by some random spider that wandered in through a crack. This wasn't a normal nest. This was a sign, a lure, a way to make me freeze by the kitchen door, a way to make me call Tim home, a way to make him come into this room and stand exactly where he was standing now. The baby shifted again inside me, a harder movement, and I almost cried from the relief of feeling it. The baby was alive. I was alive. I took another step backward. My heel bumped the kitchen door behind me, and the small sound made the shadow above pause, not like an animal startled by noise, like something listening, like something deciding. The threads attached to Tim's arms quivered. One strand caught the light, and for the first time I could see how many there were, a web so fine it was nearly invisible until you knew to look. It wasn't only holding him up. It was mapped across the kitchen, anchored in corners, under cabinets, across the ceiling, like a system. A web built by something with time. The voice came again, not from Tim's mouth, but from above, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. "They're dead," it said, and the words were muffled the way they'd been before, like a voice speaking through a door. Like it was repeating the first line I'd heard tonight perfectly, because it knew it had worked. My stomach dropped. I realized then that maybe Tim hadn't spoken to me at all from the other side of the door. Maybe Tim hadn't answered my questions. Maybe Tim hadn't even been alive in the way I thought since he walked in. Or maybe he had, and that made it worse, because it meant he'd been here, hearing me, unable to move, unable to warn me, forced to stand still while something learned his voice and used it to guide me exactly where it wanted me. I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work. The only sound I made was a small breath that sounded like a sob. The shadow above shifted again, and the leg nearest the light moved far enough that the ceiling bulb caught it fully. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a leg, thick and dark, with faint texture along it like coarse hair or tiny spines. It moved slowly, almost gently, like it was touching the air. My body finally did what it should have done from the start. It tried to run, but pregnancy changes the way you run. It changes the way you balance and turn and lift your feet. I twisted toward the door behind me, hands shaking, and tried to pull it open. The knob didn't turn. For a second, I thought my grip was weak. I tried again. Harder. Nothing. Locked. I hadn't locked it. I never locked the kitchen door from the inside. There was no reason to. We didn't even have a habit of closing it. My pulse exploded in my ears. Above me, the thing moved, and Tim's body, tilted one more inch toward me as the threads tightened, as if someone above wanted him to face me properly. The voice, too close now, spoke again in that wrong imitation of Tim. "Do you need to come check?" I backed away from the door, trapped between the island and the wall, my eyes flicking desperately across the room for anything that could help. A knife block. A chair. The drawer where we kept scissors. My phone. Where was my phone? Still in the living room, probably, sitting on the couch where I'd been watching Jeopardy like an idiot. Tim's keys weren't on the counter. His bag wasn't by the door. There were no signs he'd come home the way he always did. I looked at Tim's back again and saw something I hadn't been able to see before, because my mind refused it. There was no slack in his posture, no sag of real weight. He was held up entirely by the threads, and in the harsh kitchen light, his skin looked slightly wrong, too still, too waxy, like a person under too much makeup, like a shape someone was using. The baby kicked again, sharp, and I forced myself to breathe. I forced my lungs to pull air, even though it felt like breathing through water. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the right move was when something that big was above you, and the door wouldn't open, and the person you trusted most was hanging like a puppet in front of you. All I knew was that whatever was in the corner had been listening the whole time. It had listened when I panicked about the egg sack. It had listened when I called for Tim. It had listened when I tried to stay brave on the couch. And now it was listening to my breathing, counting it, learning it. I took one slow step sideways, trying to put the island between me and the corner. My bare foot slid slightly on the tile because my skin was damp with sweat. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. The threads above quivered in response, as if the whole web felt my movement. And the giant shadow, no, the giant spider, shifted again. Just enough that I saw the curve of its body pressed tight to the ceiling, the way it flattened itself, like it had practiced hiding there. It had been in this house the whole time, maybe longer than I'd lived here, maybe longer than the house had belonged to anyone at all. The last thing I heard before the kitchen light flickered, just once, was Tim's voice again, soft and mocking, as if it was enjoying the timing of it. "Not yet," it said. And then, above me, something moved with intention. Story 4. I don't remember Callie. Not the way you remember a friend from school, or even the way you remember a favorite toy. I don't have a clear image I can hold up in my mind and say, yes, that's her. I don't have a memory of her voice, or the way she moved, or the way she made me feel when I was awake in the middle of the day. Everything I know about her comes from my mom. She's told me the story in pieces over the years, never all at once. When I was younger, she told it carefully, like she was testing how much I could handle, like she didn't want to drop something heavy into my lap and watch it crack. Then, as I got older, little details slipped out, when she was tired, or when she'd had a glass of wine, or when I asked the wrong question at the wrong time. If you put all those pieces together, it doesn't sound like a normal imaginary friend story. It doesn't sound playful. It doesn't sound like a kid making something up because they're lonely or bored. It sounds like I was living with someone my mom couldn't see. According to her, it started when I was around 4 or 5. That age when kids can talk well enough to tell stories, but still live halfway in a world where pretend and real can touch each other. My mom says I didn't just mention Callie. I talked about her like she belonged in the house, the same way we belonged there. Like she had a spot. Like she had routines. Like she had preferences. I would ask my mom to set a place for her at the dinner table, not in the casual way kids ask for things, like, can Teddy sit here? I would insist on it, like it mattered, like leaving her out would be rude or dangerous. My mom told me I'd tug at her sleeve while she was plating food and say, very seriously, Callie needs a plate too. At first, my mom thought it was cute. She played along, because parents do that. They want their kids to feel safe. They want their kids to feel heard. So, she'd take an extra fork and put it on the table, and pour a little water into a cup, and ask, is this okay? And I'd nod, satisfied, like she'd done something important. Sometimes I'd laugh at things nobody else heard. Not a little giggle, not the kind of laugh you do when you're making up a joke. My mom said I would laugh hard, hysterically, like someone had said something genuinely funny right in my ear. And when she asked me what was so funny, I wouldn't try to explain it the way kids usually do. I'd just say, Callie said it, and then laugh again. The thing that sticks with my mom, she said this more than once, like it's the detail she can't put down, was how consistent I was. Kids change their minds all the time. They invent a friend one day and forget them the next. They say someone is a dinosaur on Monday and a superhero on Tuesday. They change names. They change hair color. They change stories. They get bored and move on. But with Callie, I didn't change anything. Callie always looked the same according to what I told my mom. Long brown hair, a white bow, a white dress, like a flower girl, like someone dressed for a wedding, or church, or a formal event where kids are told to stand still and behave. If my mom asked me what Callie was wearing, I'd give the same answer. If she asked where Callie was standing, I'd point to a spot as if I was indicating a real person. If she asked what Callie was doing, I'd tell her like it was obvious. My mom said it didn't feel like I was inventing details. It felt like I was reporting, like I was describing someone I could see, the way you describe a person sitting on your couch. Sometimes my mom would test me without realizing she was testing. She'd ask on purpose when I was distracted. When I was playing or coloring, The kind of moment when a kid would normally give a random answer just to keep playing. "What color are her shoes?" she'd ask, and I'd answer quickly, like it was simple, like I didn't have to think. My mom told me I even corrected her once. She said something like, "Tell Callie to sit down." And I looked at her with this serious little face and said, "She can't sit. She doesn't sit." That was one of the first moments my mom said she felt a small chill. Not fear exactly, just a sense that the game wasn't a game for me. But still, she didn't panic. Imaginary friends are normal. People will tell you that over and over if you bring it up. It's a sign of creativity. It's a sign of intelligence. It's a sign that your kid is processing emotions in a safe way. My mom wanted that explanation. She wanted it so badly that she held on to it even when things started feeling wrong. We lived in an apartment back then. It wasn't a bad place, just small. One of those units where the bedrooms open right off the living room. You could stand in the hallway and see the couch, the TV, the kitchen table, all at once. There wasn't much space to get away from each other, which meant my mom always knew where I was, and I always knew where she was. My mom has told me she didn't like that apartment at night. She couldn't explain why. It wasn't in a dangerous neighborhood. The locks worked. The windows were fine. But the place felt thin, like sound traveled too easily, like you could hear your neighbors breathe through the walls, like the air had too many corners in it. She didn't tell me that when I was little. She didn't want me to feel her fear. But when she tells the Callie story now, I can hear it. That background discomfort she lived with before Callie ever became a problem. For a while, Callie was just there. I'd talk about her while I played. I'd pause in the middle of a cartoon and look toward the hallway and smile as if someone was standing there. I'd sit on my bed and whisper as if I was sharing secrets with someone. My mom said I would sometimes stand near my bedroom doorway and tilt my head, listening to something she couldn't hear. When my mom asked me if Callie was my friend, I'd say yes. When she asked me if Callie was nice, I'd say yes. When she asked me where Callie lived, I'd shrug and say, "Here, not next door, not in my imagination, not she came to visit. Here," like it was the simplest answer in the world. My mom didn't push it much, not at first. She didn't want to turn it into something heavy. She thought if she kept it light, it would stay light. Then there was the night everything changed. My mom says she remembers it clearly because it's one of those memories your body stores differently. It's not a normal memory. It's a marker, before and after. It was a normal bedtime. She read me my favorite book, Take Me to the Zoo. I've asked her why she remembers the title so clearly, and she said because she still hears my little voice asking for it, like a recording. Because she still sees the way I curled into my pillow while she turned the pages. After the book, she tucked me in, kissed my forehead, turned on the little night light that made the room glow warm and orange. Then she went to her bedroom. She fell asleep. That part matters to her because she has guilt about it. She always adds, "I was asleep," like she's apologizing. Like she wants me to understand she didn't choose to not be there. She didn't choose to be unaware. She was asleep when I came running into her room. I don't remember it, but I believe her because I can picture the kind of fear it must have taken to pull me out of bed like that. My mom says I was crying so hard I was hiccuping, breath catching painfully in my throat. Not the soft sobbing you do after a nightmare, not whimpering. This was panic. the kind of crying where your whole body shakes. She sat up fast, instantly awake. She asked what was wrong, pulled me onto the bed, tried to hold my face so I'd look at her. And all I could say was the same sentence over and over. Callie changed. My mom said at first she didn't understand. She thought maybe I meant Callie changed clothes, or maybe I was upset about a dream. She asked me what I meant, tried to keep her voice calm. "What do you mean, honey? What changed?" And I kept saying it like it was the only language I had for it. Callie changed. Callie changed. My mom told me she tried to ground me. She asked if I'd had a bad dream. She asked if I'd woken up and felt scared. She asked if I needed water. She tried to wipe my face, tried to get me breathing normally. Then she asked, gently, "Where is Callie right now?" My mom says I went completely still at that question. My crying didn't stop, but my body stiffened. My eyes wouldn't go toward the doorway, not even for a second, not even a glance. Their bedroom door in that apartment faced the living room. If you sat on the bed, you could see straight through the bedroom doorway, across a strip of carpet, and into the dark living room. Beyond that was my bedroom, also dark. My mom says she could feel the whole apartment in that moment, could feel how open it was, how there was nowhere to hide if something was in the living room. She could feel the distance between her bed and the door like it was miles. She asked again, more firmly, "Where is she?" Callie turned into a man. Not she left, not she went away, not she looks different. Turned, as if it was a physical shift, a change of form, a skin being traded for another skin. My mom said the way I said it made her stomach drop. Not because the words were spooky in a story way, but because of the way a child says something they know is true. I wasn't confused. I wasn't curious. I was terrified. I said it like something I trusted had become something else entirely. My mom's instincts kicked in. She told me later she felt like an animal in that moment, like she could sense danger without seeing it. She scooped me up and held me tight. She turned her body so her back faced the doorway, shielding me. She did what parents do when they think something is wrong. She tried to make herself bigger. She asked me if the man was in the living room. She asked me if he was in my room. She asked me if he was outside. She asked if Callie was still there. If the man was Callie, if the man was someone else. My mom said I would not answer, not clearly. I just kept crying and staring at the corner of her bedroom like it was the only safe direction. At one point, my mom said she tried to look out into the living room herself, just to reassure herself there was nothing there. She told me that was when she realized something else. The apartment was too quiet. Not quiet like nighttime quiet. Quiet like when the power goes out and suddenly there's no refrigerator hum, no distant traffic, no normal house noises, like sound itself had been pressed down. She listened hard and heard nothing except my crying and her own breathing. She didn't get out of bed. She didn't go check the living room. She didn't go to my room. I think she's still ashamed of that, and maybe she should be. Maybe she shouldn't. I don't know what I would have done. It's easy to say you'd be brave when you're not the one holding a crying child and staring into a dark doorway. My mom stayed in bed with me until I calmed down. She kept a lamp on. She kept me in her arms. She didn't sleep. She watched the doorway until the light outside started turning gray. Then morning came, and nothing obvious had happened. No broken lock, no open window, no stranger in the living room. But something had changed anyway. Because after that night, I never mentioned Callie again, not once. No fading out. No Callie went away. No Callie moved. No Callie is mad at me. Nothing. Just silence. Like she'd never existed at all. My mom says that was the part that truly scared her. Imaginary friends stop showing up all the time, but kids usually talk about it. They mourn, they explain, they replace. They shift to another pretend game. They say something like, Callie went home, even if home is a made-up place. But I didn't do that. I acted like Callie had never been part of my life, which is strange considering how much space she'd taken up before. My mom tried to bring it up carefully a few days later. "Do you remember Callie?" she asked. I stared at her like she was being weird, like she'd asked me if I remembered a person I'd never met. "What?" I said. "Your friend?" She tried. "The girl you talked about." I didn't answer. Or I shrugged. Or I said, "I don't know." My mom says she remembers the way my face closed off, the way I went quiet, the way my body seemed to decide the subject was dangerous. So she stopped asking. But she also noticed other things. After that night, I slept with my bedroom door open. Always. Not cracked, not halfway, open. Wide open, like I needed a clear path to the hallway, like I needed a line of sight to the living room, like I needed to know I could get out fast if something happened. If my mom tried to close it even a little, I'd get upset. Sometimes I'd cry. Sometimes I'd get angry. Sometimes I'd just stand there and stare until she reopened it. My mom didn't push it. Parents learn quickly which battles are worth fighting and which ones aren't. A child sleeping with their door open isn't a problem. It's odd, but it doesn't hurt anyone. So she let me do it. The thing is, I kept doing it. Years passed, and the door stayed open at night, even when we moved to a different place. Even when I got older and stopped being scared of cartoons and thunderstorms and dark closets. Even when I started acting like a normal kid in every other way, my door stayed open. I didn't really notice it until I was a teenager and a friend stayed over and asked why I slept like that. I told them I didn't know. I told them I just liked it. But that wasn't true. It wasn't about liking it. It was about needing it. I probably started closing my bedroom door when I was 16, and even then it didn't feel natural. It felt like choosing to be trapped. It felt like choosing to not have an escape route. I had to force myself to do it, like building a new habit over an old instinct. Even now, as an adult, I catch myself looking at corners and doorways without meaning to, especially at night. I'll be in bed reading and suddenly realize I've been staring at the corner of my room for a full minute. Or I'll walk into a dark room and pause in the doorway like I'm waiting for something to shift. And every once in a while, I get that feeling that something is off. Not like I heard a sound, not like I saw a shadow, just a subtle wrongness, like the room has one extra presence in it that isn't mine. I try to laugh it off when it happens. I tell myself I'm tired. I tell myself it's old fear living in muscle memory. I tell myself a story so I can live inside it. But then, I think about what my mom said, about the way I described Callie the same way every time, about how I made room for her in our home like she was real, about how I didn't talk about her like a pretend friend. I talked about her like a person. And then that one night, I ran into my mom's room terrified and said, "Callie changed." I said she turned into a man. And then I never spoke her name again. Sometimes I wonder if Callie was ever a girl at all, or if that was just the shape she used, because it was the shape I would trust. A child in a white dress, a flower girl, something harmless, something you wouldn't question in the corner of your eye. Sometimes I wonder if my mother ever really saw nothing in the living room that night, or if she saw something and chose not to tell me. Sometimes I wonder if the reason she tells the story in pieces is because she's still holding back the part that would make it too real for both of us. And sometimes, when it's late and I'm half asleep and the room is quiet, I think about how I described Callie. Brown hair, white bow, white dress. Always the same. Like a uniform, like a disguise. And I find myself staring at my doorway, waiting for the moment something shifts in the dark, and trying not to think the thought that follows right behind it. If she could change once, she can change again. Story 5. A few weeks ago, a patient came into my practice showing behavior that felt strange even for someone with a brain tumor. I'm used to odd presentations. I'm used to families sitting in my office describing a person who, in their words, isn't himself anymore. I'm used to the way fear makes people exaggerate and the way denial makes them minimize. I'm used to angry patients, scared patients, patients who want a cure, and patients who don't want to hear the word surgery. Still, this case sat wrong with me from the beginning. He was a young man, mid-20s, brought in by his parents. They looked exhausted in that special way caregivers do when they've been sleeping in short bursts for weeks. His mother kept smoothing the edge of her sleeve like she couldn't stop. His father answered most of my questions too quickly, like he was afraid that if he paused, the situation would collapse. They told me their son had been completely normal until a month or two earlier. Then the changes started. Not one clear symptom, not a simple, "he's been forgetful," but a steady rearranging of him. His food preferences changed first. He stopped eating what he'd always liked and began craving things he'd never touched. Then his speech changed. His mother said he started using words he'd never used before, speaking in a flatter rhythm, pausing in strange places. He began dressing differently too, choosing clothes that didn't look like his style, as if he'd opened someone else's closet and decided it belonged to him. They told me about rage episodes, sudden, intense anger over small things, a look in his eyes they didn't recognize, objects thrown, doors slammed, things broken. His father admitted quietly that there were moments when he was afraid to be alone with his son. While they talked, the young man sat in my chair and watched the room without moving much. He wasn't drooling, wasn't confused, wasn't visibly psychotic. He held eye contact when spoken to. He answered when I asked him direct questions. He seemed composed, almost calm in a way that didn't match his parents' panic. That made it hard to measure what was real. I hadn't known him before, so I didn't have a baseline version to compare him to. In the exam room, he appeared functional. He wasn't slurring. His gait looked normal. His reflexes were intact. He solved the small cognitive tasks I gave him without trouble. If he had been alone in front of me, without the parent's story, I might have labeled him anxious and sent him for imaging out of caution, but I would not have guessed the picture they were painting. Still, the parents were too consistent to dismiss. Their worry wasn't dramatic, it was specific, so I ordered a series of scans. When the images came back, The result was, medically speaking, unsurprising. A meningioma, fairly well defined, pressing against the frontal lobe. These tumors are often benign in the cancer sense, but benign is a misleading word when the problem is location. Pressure is pressure. The brain doesn't care if the mass is malignant or not. It cares that something is pushing into tissue that controls mood, impulse, decision-making, personality. Personality changes with frontal lobe pressure are common enough that I've explained them many times. Irritability, depression, poor judgment, reduced inhibition, sometimes apathy, sometimes inappropriate jokes, sometimes behavior that looks like someone's character has been turned up or down. What bothered me here was how comprehensive the parent's description was. It wasn't only anger. It was as if someone had slowly swapped out the patient's preferences, his habits, his way of speaking, the way he moved through the world. It sounded less like a symptom list and more like a replacement. I didn't say that, of course. I kept it clinical. I explained what the scans showed, how the tumor's position could affect behavior, and why surgery was recommended. At that stage, I genuinely believed removing it would resolve the issue. I've seen people regain themselves after decompression. Not always fully, not always instantly, but enough to make the families cry with relief. The brain is resilient when it's given room. The patient, at first, was friendly during our appointments. He answered questions politely. He said the right things. He signed what needed signing. He listened. But once we identified the tumor and started planning the procedure, his attitude toward me shifted sharply, like someone flipped a switch. During a pre-op consult, I was reviewing the risks in the standard way. Bleeding, infection, seizures, deficits, anesthesia complications. I was halfway through, pointing at a diagram, when he interrupted me. "You're making a big mistake," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. There was a fixed intensity there that didn't feel like fear of surgery. It felt like anger at being interfered with. "You'd better leave me alone." I'd been doing this long enough to recognize when someone is trying to control a conversation by escalating it. I also knew he wasn't fully himself. The tumor was pressing into the exact area that helps people regulate impulse. Reasoning with him might have been like reasoning with a storm. Still, I tried. "If I leave you alone," I said, keeping my voice calm, "this tumor will continue to grow. Eventually, it will affect more than your mood. It can change your ability to work, to drive, to take care of yourself. It can take over your life. That's what I want," he shouted. He gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles whitened. His face reddened, jaw working as if he was trying to bite down on something inside his mouth. For a moment I thought he might stand and cross the room, and I did a fast mental check of distance and exits, which is not a thought any physician enjoys having in their own office. But he didn't move. He sat there, rigid, shaking slightly with contained rage, and stared at me as if I had personally insulted him. The appointment ended soon after. I didn't push further in that moment. I documented the behavior, spoke to his parents outside the room, and emphasized that we might need additional support on the day of surgery, including medication for agitation. His parents nodded, like they were already expecting that. On the day of the procedure, his instability worsened. He fought the staff, not in a sloppy, panicked way, but with deliberate resistance. He yanked his arm away when the nurse tried to place an IV. He cursed. He tried to leave. When we guided him back, he shoved. It escalated until we had no choice but to sedate him for everyone's safety, including his. Even then, as we administered general anesthesia, I remember thinking how young he looked on the table. The body is always younger than the crisis it's carrying. The nurses positioned his head. The anesthesiologist monitored his vitals. The room settled into the familiar focus of surgery, where everything becomes steps and numbers and controlled movements. The procedure began routinely. We prepped the site, made the incision, reflected tissue, accessed the skull. Everything was technically normal. We navigated to the tumor using imaging guidance, and for a while it felt like any other case of this type. I spoke with my OR team in that low, practical tone you use when someone's brain is open. I made a comment about the weather. Someone replied. Someone asked if I was still going to that baseball game later. I said, yes. That kind of small talk is normal. It's a way to stay steady, to keep your hands from becoming too precious with fear. I know people don't like imagining surgeons chatting during a craniotomy. They want to believe it's solemn, silent, like a church. But the reality is that if you treat every moment as sacred in the dramatic sense, you burn out quickly. And you need steady hands more than you need reverence. It wasn't until I reached the tumor that something felt off. A meningioma usually has a certain feel. It has texture. It separates in a particular way. You learn the difference between tissue and mass through your fingertips. You learn what should yield and what shouldn't. As I began excising it, I had the distinct sensation that something was pressing back against my instruments. Not in the way tissue sometimes resists, not the normal tension of separating layers. It felt like pressure with intent, like the mass didn't want to be moved, like it was meeting my tool rather than simply being acted upon. From my angle, I couldn't see every millimeter directly, but the imaging feed showed the mass in relation to surrounding structures. And there were a couple of moments, brief, subtle, when it looked like it shifted. Not a gross movement, not something that would show up on a report as motile, but enough to make my stomach tighten. I remember pausing and adjusting the view, telling myself it was the camera angle, the normal effect of suction and retraction, the way fluid can create the illusion of motion. I told myself I was tired. I told myself not to let my brain turn an ordinary challenge into a story, so I continued. The removal otherwise was unremarkable. Hemostasis, closure, the familiar sequence of finishing a job that feels both precise and surreal. We closed him up and transferred him to recovery. I was especially interested in his outcome given the degree of behavioral change reported by the parents, so as soon as I heard he was awake, I went to see him. He was groggy, eyes half open, mouth dry. His hair was shaved at the site. There was bandaging. Monitors beeped softly beside him. And it was immediately clear I was speaking to a different person. Not medically different in the sense of delirium. Different in the way you notice someone's posture, their gaze, their tone. The anger was gone. The tension was gone. Even the way he held his face looked subtly altered, like the muscles had been allowed to rest. "Hello," I said. "How are you feeling?" He blinked slowly. "Tired," he said, and the word sounded normal. Human, not loaded. Most notably, he didn't threaten me. He didn't glare. He didn't warn me to leave him alone. He asked for water. He thanked the nurse. He looked briefly confused when his parents entered and started crying. But he didn't explode. I considered it a success. I let myself feel a small professional relief. Tumor removed, pressure relieved, patient stable, family hopeful. We sent the specimen for biopsy, as usual, and I finished my shift. That night, I went to the baseball game. I remember the stadium lights and the clean green field, and how strange it felt to sit in a crowd, cheering while my hands still remembered the texture of tissue. I remember thinking, on the drive home, that I might finally sleep well, that the whole thing would become one more case, filed away. The next morning, the threats began. When I arrived at work, I found the words, "You're dead," scratched into my office door. Not written in marker, not taped on a note, scratched like someone had used a key or the tip of a blade and carved it into the paint. I stood there staring at it, trying to force my mind to find a normal explanation. A prank from a resident, a tasteless joke, a random act of vandalism. Someone angry about a different case. Hospitals collect human emotion the way filters collect dirt. People get furious. People misplace grief. People want someone to blame. But the words were too direct, and my name was on that door. Not in letters, but in context. It was my office. It was meant for me. I contacted hospital administration. They contacted security. Security contacted the police. My entire morning disappeared into questions, reports, and uncomfortable conversations in fluorescent-lit rooms, where everyone tries to speak calmly while looking slightly alarmed. I tried to stay steady. I told myself this was probably just a prank, that someone wanted to scare a surgeon because they were bored, or because they disliked me, or because they thought it was funny. That belief lasted until I checked my email. There was a message from an unknown sender. No name, no meaningful address, just an empty identity. The body of the email contained the same words as my door, repeated again and again, hundreds of times. No punctuation, no capital letters. Nothing but a relentless line. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead. It filled the screen until my eyes started to blur, and I had the irrational urge to scroll quickly. Like if I could reach the end, I'd be safe. More messages followed. Not just email. Calls too. Voicemails that were mostly silence, but sometimes had a faint breathing sound, like someone holding the phone close to their mouth and not speaking. A text from an unknown number that said simply, "You're dead." And with every new contact, the creeping realization grew stronger. Someone wasn't joking. Someone wanted me to believe they were coming for me. I thought about leaving work. I thought about calling in sick. I thought about going straight home and locking the door. Like a locked door has ever stopped the kinds of threats that travel through phones. But I concluded I was in just as much danger anywhere. At least in the hospital there were cameras and security guards and other people around. Half the building knew about the vandalism by lunchtime. It's hard to keep a secret in a place that runs on gossip and fear. The only interruption to the constant low anxiety came after lunch, when Hannah from pathology knocked on my door. Hannah was one of the few people in the hospital I genuinely liked. Smart, direct, not the type to dramatize things. She had a calm way of speaking, even when she was delivering terrible news. If she came to my office in person, it usually meant something about the specimen wasn't routine. She asked to come in, smiling as she stepped inside, a folder in her hands. "The specimen you sent down yesterday," she said, placing the folder on my desk, "was unlike anything I've ever seen before." The hairs on my arms lifted. My mind jumped back to those brief moments in the OR when I felt that pushing sensation against my instruments. I kept my face neutral. I didn't want to lead her. I didn't want her to see my discomfort and start trying to comfort me with the wrong kind of reassurance. "How so?" I asked. Hannah hesitated, which was unlike her. She flipped the folder open but didn't slide it to me right away, as if she wasn't sure I should be looking at what was inside. "I can't classify it," she said. "Not fully. It doesn't fit any known tissue patterns I'm familiar with." "That's unusual," I said, forcing my voice to stay professional. "There's something else," she added. I felt my stomach tighten the way it does before bad news. She looked at my computer screen, then at me. "Can you show me your notes from the surgery?" she asked. At the time, I didn't question why she needed my notes when I was sitting right in front of her. I assumed she wanted to compare my operative description with her findings. I assumed she wanted to confirm location, appearance, texture. I turned to my computer and started pulling up the operative report. We sat in silence while I typed, the click of keys loud in the small room. I was one search away from opening the document when Hannah spoke again, casually, as if continuing a normal conversation. "How was the baseball game?" My hand stopped on the keyboard. I looked up slowly. I had never told her about the baseball game. I'd mentioned it in the OR, yes, but Hannah hadn't been in the OR. Pathology wasn't in there with us. She wouldn't have known. I opened my mouth to say that, to ask how she knew, but the words got stuck because the expression on her face had changed. She was glaring at me, not the mild irritation of someone impatient, not the focused stare of someone thinking. It was rage, raw and twisted, like her face couldn't hold it properly. Her eyes looked sharper, her mouth pulled tight. Her breathing was heavy, and for a moment I had the absurd thought that she looked like someone else wearing Hannah's skin badly. That's when I saw the scalpel in her hand. It was a real surgical scalpel, not a pen, not a letter opener. I don't know where she got it. I don't know when she picked it up. I only know that it was there, angled toward me, reflecting the office light in a clean, bright line. "You should have left me alone," she shouted. Then she lunged over my desk. The speed of it stunned me. The office chair rolled back under me. My hands flew up instinctively, not to fight, but to protect my face and throat. The blade flashed. I felt pressure, then warmth, then saw red blooming on my shirt like a slow spill. It's strange how pain works in moments like that. People expect agony. Often you don't feel much at first. Adrenaline makes everything sharp and distant. The mind focuses on one task: keep the blade away from something vital. Hannah, whatever was driving Hannah, swung wildly. I grabbed her wrist with both hands and tried to force the blade away, but she was stronger than she should have been, or more relentless. She moved like someone who didn't care about injury, about consequences, about what would happen to her body afterward. We struggled across the desk, knocking over the folder, scattering papers. The scalpel scraped my forearm. I saw another red stain spreading. I tried to twist away, but my chair caught The desk edge pressed into my ribs. Hannah's face was inches from mine, eyes wide with hatred, teeth clenched. I shouted. I don't even remember what I shouted. Something useless, something like stop, or help, or no. Security heard. Thank God they heard. The door flew open, and 2 men rushed in. Then another. It took multiple people to pull her off me. She fought them like an animal. She kicked, thrashed, tried to reach for the blade again even as they pinned her arms. Her voice wasn't Hannah's anymore. It kept dropping into that same furious tone. "Leave me alone," she hissed. "Leave me alone." Someone finally wrenched the scalpel away and shoved it into a drawer. Someone else pressed a towel to my arm. My office looked like a storm passed through it. When they had Hannah restrained, she stopped struggling suddenly. She went limp in their grip, like her energy had been switched off. Her face smoothed into something empty. She stared at the wall as if she'd forgotten where she was. I was rushed to the ER to get stitched up, sitting under bright clinical lights while someone cleaned my cuts. I kept replaying one detail in my head. The baseball game. How did she know? Who told her? Why did she say it like it meant something? Like it was part of a plan? Then the other thought, the one I didn't want to let fully form, started sharpening into clarity. It was impossible, and yet it felt more logical than anything else. As soon as I could get out of the ER, as soon as my wounds were bandaged, and I had convinced everyone I was stable enough to walk, I went straight to pathology. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want questions. I didn't want someone to stop me. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The pathology wing smelled different than the rest of the hospital, colder and more chemical. The lights there always feel harsher. The doors are heavier. Everything is labeled. Everything is controlled. Specimens don't vanish. Chain of custody is strict. That's part of the point. I found the storage area after a little searching. I located the container label for the mass removed the day before. My hands shook as I reached for it. I remember noticing, absurdly, that the plastic felt too smooth. I lifted the lid. It was empty. No tissue. No mass. No pale, irregular shape floating in preservative. Nothing. Just clear fluid and the faint smell of something that shouldn't have been missing. For a long moment, I stood there, staring into the container as if my eyes could force the missing object back into existence. My mind tried to build normal explanations first because the brain always does. A mix-up. The specimen moved to another container. A labeling error. Someone disposed of it by mistake. Hannah, in her agitation, could have taken it. Someone could have stolen it. But none of those explanations fit the way the threats started the day after surgery, or the way Hannah looked at me when she asked about the baseball game, or the way she attacked with a scalpel like she had one purpose and nothing else. And none of those explanations fit what I'd felt in the OR. That subtle pressure, that faint sense of something pressing back. I stood there in the pathology wing, listening to the distant hum of hospital ventilation, and I realized I'd been thinking about this wrong from the beginning. I'd thought I was removing a tumor from a patient. Now I wasn't sure I had removed it at all. Now I wasn't sure what I had cut out of his head and what I had set loose when I did it.